Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Ask Her, Thrive as They Lead. My name is Sarah Weatherby, Director of Communications for Washington Area Women's Foundation. And as always, we are excited to have you join us for yet another critical discussion affecting Black women and gender-expansive individuals in our region. For those of you who are new to supporting the Women's Foundation, we are a community-supported organization committed to investing in the potential of women and girls of color across the Washington metropolitan region. We drive impactful community change through our grant making and advocacy using a gender and equity lens. Our grantee partnerships center the voices and lived experiences of women and girls of color, enabling us to influence policymakers and philanthropy. In a time of unprecedented challenges, Black women and gender-expansive leaders in the Washington, D.C. area continue to demonstrate innovation, leadership, and resilience. However, systemic inequities, present significant barriers to their success. Today, we are honored to discuss our recently released report, Thrive as They Lead, Advancing the Infrastructure to Support Black Women Leaders in the DC metro area nonprofit sector. This report is the culmination of a 6-month project that highlights the 10 critical themes that emerged during anonymous interviews with nearly 40 Black women and gender-expansive leaders across the region. Leadership, support, expectations, vulnerability, resisting scarcity, boards, compensation, funding, donor relationships, and wellness. During this journey, our project partner, KDF Strategies, created a safe and supportive space for these leaders to candidly discuss their experiences and the actions they believe the sector must take to secure a sustainable and equitable future. The findings and recommendations in our report include innovative approaches to invest in their growth and development. The central message of their insights is simple yet powerful. We must listen to Black women, trust Black women, and invest in Black women. Now, before we begin, I encourage you to engage with our panelists today and share your comments in the chat. Additionally, feel free to ask any questions you may have for our panelists using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. At the end of our discussion, we'll do our best to ensure your questions are answered. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, I want to briefly take a moment to introduce you to our remarkable panelists today. First, we have Dr. Indira Hennard. Indira has been an unwavering advocate for survivors of sexual violence. With over 15 years at the DC Rape Crisis Center, her roles span from fundraising, operations, cultivating relationships, and coalition building. As executive director, Indira not only repositioned the oldest rape crisis center in the country, but laid a robust foundation for 50 years of survivor-centered and community-led services. Her direct service experience in gender-based violence programs inform her policy analysis, leading to coordinator public policy initiatives nationally and internationally. Indira aids organizations in responding to sexual violence. Next, I'd like to welcome Dr. Tamara Wilds-Lawson. As president and CEO of Washington Area Women's Foundation, Tamara leverages her extensive expertise to advance economic security for women and girls of color in the Washington metropolitan region. Previously, she served as the Movement, Issue, and Charitable Organizations Director at Act Blue and Chief Community Impact Inclusion Officer for Washington National Philanthropies. Joining us next is Kube Gage. Since taking the helm as president and CEO in 2017, Kube has been instrumental in leading the District Alliance for Safe Housing toward growth and innovation, securing safe housing and services for survivors of domestic and sexual violence in the district. Her successful leadership transitioned Dash from a $3 million to a $12 million organization. Previously, she served as Chief Operating Officer at the Arlington Food Assistance Center, where she oversaw dramatic expansion successfully to more than 6,000 people weekly in need at 18 different distribution centers. And finally, we have Tonya Wellens. Tonya is the president and CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation, the largest public foundation in the region with over $450 million in assets and $17 billion in annual grants. Under her leadership, the Community Foundation developed a bold 10-year strategic vision that will leverage our resources and expertise to lead our community in addressing the most catalytic opportunity of our lifetimes. closing our community's racial wealth gap. She has over 20 years of experience in public-private partnerships, financial access, and international development. Indira, Tamara, Kube, and Tonya, thank you for being here with us today. Now I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Tamara, so we can get right into it.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. I am delighted to be in this virtual space with these phenomenal women, all of whom are leaders that I've already learned quite a bit from in the short time that I've been president and CEO of the Women's Foundation. Thank you very much to each of you for showing up the way that you do in this sector. And as we ready ourselves for this important conversation, I encourage those of you who have joined us to consider this discussion part of an ongoing collective conversation about what feels like a Black women's leadership crisis. RAG, now Philanthropy DMV, held its annual meeting on Monday, and Ruth Latoya-Eiffel and her team did a phenomenal job of foregrounding wellness and healing. Within that discussion, this theme of what it means and costs to lead as a Black woman reverberated loudly. It was both intense and affirming. And I hope you leave this conversation as I left that meeting, in deep thought about my experiences and responsibility to myself and other leaders. And I'm just happy this conversation is following up so closely behind that gathering. We need to keep calling this out as what it is, which is a crisis. As a community, we have a unique opportunity to address past harm and invest more deeply in the leadership of Black women and Black gender-expansive folks. This work is long overdue, it's uncomfortable, but the frank and resolute voices featured in the report, as well as these women, will help illuminate a path forward. As Sarah mentioned, the challenges faced by Black women and Black gender-expansive leaders in the Washington metropolitan area are profound and ones we simply cannot ignore. As we get into this conversation, about which I'm really excited, we as a community have a unique opportunity before us. We can disrupt racist practices, address past harm, and invest in the leadership of Black women. This shift is long overdue, but the frank, courageous, and resolute voices featured in our report, as well as those on this panel, illuminate a path forward. So let's get into it. Again, I'm really happy to see you all smiling faces. And to start the conversation, I would appreciate it if each of you just say a little bit more about your organizations and the work that you do. And then additionally, I'd like to hear a little bit about what inspired your participation and involvement in this critical movement. Indira, can you start us off?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much, Tamara. And let me just take a point of privilege and say thank you to the Washington Area Women's Foundation for really holding and centering this work in such an intentional way. And it's such a pleasure to be on this panel with you and Kube and Tonya. So thank you all so much. The DC Rape Crisis Center, as mentioned, we are the oldest rape crisis center in the country and the only one in DC, and we are in our 51st year, which is really exciting. We provide direct services to survivors of sexual assault, to include mental health, our 24/7 hotline, as well as our 24/7 hospital-based and community-based advocacy program. In addition to that, our work not only extends locally, but nationally and internationally as well. We also do community engagement, training, and technical assistance and public policy advocacy. So that's just a quick snapshot of what we do at the Rape Crisis Center. What really inspired my involvement in this crucial movement is a few things, chief among them being a Black woman leader and understanding the cost it is to be a Black woman leader in this sector. I think the other really critical piece for me was continuing to see what this work and lack of support and lack of resources is doing to Black women leaders on a mental health level and just on a level that is really disrupting people's lives. And so I'm really excited about what's to come. And I think I will also ask that we also just think about the ways in which we are also supporting Black women in our lives.
Tonya?
Thanks, Tamara. I echo the thanks and the acknowledgement to the Washington Area Women's Foundation and to the entire group that was really that instigated this report and this body of work. I know that Kube and Indira were early partners, but there's a table of other women and people who were a part of this work as well. Community Foundation is a 50-year-old public trust. We cover the Greater Washington region. Most of you know that we are a grant maker, one of the largest in the region, and we take a lot of pride in that. But we also take a lot of pride in being a convener, a partnership builder, and an advocate. And so we can deepen and strengthen our advocacy chops by participating in commissioning research like this report, like our Voices DMV. It really gives us standing in the community to have a finger on the pulse of what both community members and community need, nonprofit leaders need, and figuring out how we can match those needs with the funding community and their investment opportunities. And so I am committed to this work and inspired by it, really rooted in a fundamental belief on the importance and significance of intergenerational relationships. I think that we talk about wealth building in the context of the Community Foundation's strategy and strategic plan, and I think that there is so much wealth to be gained by making sure that we are passing down, up, up and down lessons learned, hard failures and big wins, and being in relationships so that we are supporting each other to really navigate these challenging times and to hold some level of optimism, actually lots of optimism about our future and what's ahead for us. So I'm motivated by intergenerational relationships. I'm committed, especially to keeping millennial women in my life, both personally and professionally. And so I'm excited about the conversation we get to have today.
Thanks, Tonya. Bring it home, Kube.
All right. Well, just echoing the appreciation all around to the Women's Foundation, Tanya, Indira, and everybody who's been part of getting us to this point. It is truly an honor to be here and in conversation with you all. A little bit about Dash. Dash was founded in 2006 and was and is the largest safe housing and service provider for survivors of domestic and sexual violence in the Greater Washington region. Dash provides emergency to transitional and permanent housing options for survivors, critical, flexible financial assistance, as well as the holistic supports that really start to break down the systemic barriers and inequities that for too long have kept survivors and communities of color hostage. We address as an organization the overwhelming lack of housing and social services for survivors of domestic and sexual violence and their children in the region by providing safety and necessary resources. And that is done in a couple of ways: by creating more safe housing, helping to ensure survivors can avoid homelessness by ensuring that their primary option for safety is being able to live free from abuse. We also work really closely and engage with local and federal lawmakers and civic leaders, concerned community members, as well as survivors in this movement to make sure that safe housing in the region is more accessible in the short term and ultimately less necessary in the long term, which is a really long way of saying we do really hard work, right? And for me, that is one of the main reasons why I was inspired to join this movement. Just seeing and hearing from so many of my fellow Black women leaders, myself included, who are just saying, like, my soul is tired. And so I am committed to this movement to make sure that the lives and impact and services that we as Black women make available for so many people and families in the region can be accessible to the leaders who are doing this work. And echoing what Tanya said about, the intergenerational approach, I don't know one Black woman who wants to take my job. So it is really important conversation, and just honor that I can be here to give some context and to bring my voice to the space.
Thank you all. Thank you all so much. So let me kind of pose the first question to the group, which is, what strategies can organizations employ to nurture and retain Black women leaders, ensuring they receive the necessary support and resources to thrive in their roles? Who wants to take that one first?
I can kick us off on that one. Big question: what strategies can organizations employ? So I would say one of the key things that organizations can really start to take a look at, of course, is starting to listen, but really making sure that you have an equitable lens in your hiring approaches, as well as knowing the Black women and Black women leaders in your organization. One of the key things that we find is there's a lot of support for Black women leaders throughout the rungs of leadership. And for Black women leaders who are at the top, who are president and CEOs or executive directors, there's nowhere else to turn to. So really making sure that organizations have very clear strategies of ensuring that compensation is right, ensuring that leaders who are in your organizations actually have time and space to be able to take time. Because I can't tell you how many executive directors and presidents and CEOs will tell you, oh, like, of course I have leave and I want to use the leave. But at the end of the day, if there isn't a structure in place for me to be able to do that and step away for a dedicated period of time, all the leave in the world is null and void. And I will also say concretely, another way that organizations can support and nurture leaders of color is making sure, particularly for executive directors and president and CEOs, ensure that your president and CEO and executive directors have very intentional contracts in place. Too often organizations don't think about that. And when it comes time for folks to have difficult conversations, it then becomes a very contentious process, or the leader feels like they have no voice or no power to be able to advocate for themselves. Tanya, what are your thoughts on it?
Sure. I think you're right, Kube. And I also believe that we have to look at the relationship, the governance arrangements, the governance relationship between boards and executive directors and or CEOs when it comes to nurturing and retaining Black women leaders. Many of the examples named in the report around the stress and strain of Black women leaders suffering in their roles was the result of a really poor and perhaps toxic dynamic between boards who hired the executive directors and CEOs and the CEOs themselves. And I think that, just appreciating that the hiring process is that's step one. It really is figuring out sort of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities for growth, and what the board members are going to be able to bring to bear when it comes to supporting, the leadership of the person that they selected, of the person that they chose. It's sort of this governance issue has to be one that we spend some time with, because again, most of the things named in the report point back to a really toxic kind of board environment. I will tell you that I have even had to grow in my own relationship with my board. I'm so proud of where we are today, but it really is the result of me having to learn to lean on them differently, and then them having to trust me and decide to support me in a way that I needed to be supported. And so most of the time, the board executive director relationship is one of challenge And it has to shift from being just challenge or questions, from a high level governance perspective to both support and challenge. I tell you what shifted for me was the day I used to go to my board all the time and just tell them all about all the things that were working well, all the wins, because I thought that that's what they wanted to know. And finally, one of my board members, actually another Black woman leader, said, Tonya, we know you're doing all right. I mean, we know the organization's doing okay. Vote of confidence. I want to know what's keeping you up at night. I want to know what's troubling you. I want to know the hard and difficult things that are happening, because that's where they can use their best skills and talents to help you navigate, as opposed to providing some additional burden that causes more stress and more stress than that is perhaps necessary. So I would lean in on the governance side for sure. Let's hear from you, Tamara. What do you think?
So everything you said resonates. And the only thing I will add is a recommendation to ask the question very early in your executive director or CEO's tenure, what do you need to be successful? And then return to that question with a regular cadence and take responsibility for really listening, as Kube said, and making the necessary adjustments to be of service to the leader in the same way that Tonya described we as leaders are in service of the organization and the board. That question is critical. And I encourage boards also to read this report very carefully and sit in either the discomfort or the joy of seeing that the trends that are named don't describe you. And if they do, it's an opportunity for you to do better and be better in support of your leaders.
I think I am up next. So next question for us is really centering inequitable compensation. This is a significant challenge that's been highlighted in the report. So question to the group, how can organizations and the community collaborate to ensure fair compensation for Black women leaders? Because we know money is funny when you were a Black woman.
Oh, Kube, love this question. So I'll start off if that's okay with folks. I think when I think about this question, I think about kind of three things. I think the first thing is, particularly for Black women leaders, we have to get comfortable asking for our worth, right? And then, as I like to say, add tax. So I think that's one. I think, I think two, going back to what Tonya said around the governance piece around boards, we have to be really clear about what metrics boards are using or not using as it relates to trying to decide compensation for Black women leaders, and is it equitable? Where are they getting these numbers from, or this data from, right? So if I'm coming into an organization that was previously led by a white woman and she was making hypothetically six figures and they're offering me much less, why is that? Right. So really thinking about what that looks like. And then I think the other piece, which may be a little bit uncomfortable for some boards, is when there's an executive director asking for a certain amount of compensation, they also have to be mindful of their bias and privilege, because if they personally are not used to that type of compensation themselves, having someone else come in asking for that can be a little bit like, wait a minute, is that too high? So I think Scooby Smiley. So I think we have to be really conscious, governance on boards, training with boards, education with boards. But where are the metrics coming from in terms of examining compensation? I think that's it. And then, the real reality is a lot of Black women have to fight for what they want or what they deserve, which goes into the contention around boards.
I'll just add quickly, and I know we're gonna keep coming back to Tonia's point around governance. But so there's compensation as it relates to salary during negotiations, and then there's ongoing compensation, right? Like, what does the bonus structure of the organization look like? What does the potential for an annual raise look like? What does a negotiation around taking a sabbatical look like? And how difficult is it for Black women and Black gender expansive leaders, to your point, Indira, to get what they deserve? And is that conversation painful? Is that conversation precipitated by the leader? And so that it feels like something that they're begging for versus something that they are actually entitled to, and that it is the board's responsibility to be co-creators and drivers of that conversation. I have heard too often of leaders just really feeling demoralized coming out of those conversations, and it does not have to be that way. And I would offer that for white male leaders, for example, it doesn't happen that way. So what are boards' responsibility? So what are their responsibilities to kind of look inward and to formalize an equitable process? I don't feel strongly about that at all.
No, I didn't hear it. Tonya?
Yeah. Gosh, 50% of the women that participated in the survey said that they were struggling to make it. And these are women who are EDs and or CEOs. And I just find that completely unacceptable. It really does mean that we need to, examine what we're asking people to do, what we're asking Black women leaders to do, and for how much. You can't be an effective leader if you are struggling to make it yourself. It's contradictory, and I think it's inefficient if every single nonprofit is trying to, conduct a salary survey. What are the instruments that we can use across the sector that say, if your organization is this size, has this much kind of annual revenue, or this level of responsibility, scope, size of purview in terms of your service area, then these are the ranges of salaries for that people in this grouping earn. We shouldn't have to do this on a one-off basis, because it really leaves everyone kind of vulnerable to information that you don't have access to. If you don't if you don't have enough resources to have a salary analysis done well, you're not going to get useful data, and you'll always be underpaid. And so I think we have an opportunity to think through what are the tools that we need in order to level this a bit more fairly and with a lot less strain, so that we can advocate for fair pay.
I love every part of what everybody has said, and I'll just add, for me, one of the key ways that we look at this, and I have looked at it from inequitable compensation coming into my organization. Our baseline entry level position was well below market rate. It was $38,000. I took a 20% pay cut to come in and do the work. However, we knew what we needed to do in order to elevate the organization. Now, when it comes to compensation for executive directors and CEOs, one of the very real conversation that I had with my board, many nonprofits in the region will go to 990s as your source of truth for what is the benchmark for what comparable organizations in the region or in the same field are paying their EDs and CEOs. One thing I always flag, 990s are anywhere between a year to 2 years behind schedule. And also, if we are already seeing significant and systemic under-resourcing of organizations, as well as inequitable pay for president and CEOs, that data is already way off mark. So you are starting with data that is significantly wrong. it's 2 to 3 years behind market. Those organizations are underfunded, and the EDs and CEOs are not paid appropriately. So what I said, and a really important conversation that we had with my board is, and potential options people can leverage is GuideStar or some of these really larger organizations who put out these national statistics. Wouldn't it be fantastic if that resource was made available without having to pay $1,000 or $2,000 to every organization, so that EDs and boards can have access to national data? And what I said to the board is, do not compare the salary and the work of what we do with stats that are regional and outdated. Compare the work that we do to what the market says is your standard, which is what a white man is paid to do this work. So that's your benchmark. Do not compare it to things that are systemically underfunded and under-resourced.
And I think I just want to expand on something quickly Tonya said, is that, to be clear, Black women leaders, some Black women leaders are living at the levels of their clients. They don't have health insurance. They are struggling to make ends meet. And it is a huge, huge problem, because when they are charged with managing an organization and responsible for other people's livelihood, and they are struggling with their own livelihood, what does that do on a mental health level? Right? When you are worried about if you're going to be able to pay your rent or your mortgage or go to the doctor or childcare, whatever that looks like. And so I think that's the other piece. When Black women leaders are having these type of financial struggles, who do they turn to, right? What does that support look like? What does that mentorship look like? What does that confidentiality look like? So I think, those are things we also have to think about, as we're talking about the governance piece and, things like that. I thought one time, like, do we need to set up a mutual aid for Black women leaders, which breaks my heart, right? So.
Wow. That's a lot. So now is the time for me to sit back and listen rather than answer a question. So unique funding obstacles were identified in the report. What specific steps can be taken to break down the barriers and provide more equitable access to resources for Black women and gender-expansive leaders? Who wants to get us started here?
I know we're running short on time, so I'll give quick answers. If you are a foundation listening and you put out a grant opportunity, build in an indirect cost for every grant you issue. Make that a requirement at a minimum of 20%. Give your grant, especially if it's project-based. So build in indirect. I would say Black women leaders need access to decision-making tables where money is being discussed, right? One of the core things we know is that Black-led organizations are funded at lower levels and also funded with higher restrictions. So if you are a funder on the public or private side, intentionally reach out to invite Black leaders to the tables where those decisions are being made and facilitate access. There's many more, but I know we're running short on time, so I will turn to Tamara.
Right, Tamara.
I'll just jump in quickly and say that boards have a role here too.
Mm-hmm.
Know the spaces and the rooms that Black women leaders are going into. And in some of those spaces, it's really helpful for folks to see who they believe are their peers sitting next to the Black women CEOs and EDs. Because, we're not going to be able to break through 400 years of systemic racism, right? So if you are in a corporate space and there is someone on your board who knows people in that space or they come from that space, it is more likely that that leader is going to get the funding they need if they have a source of board support sitting next to them, speaking the language of the folks who the ask is going to. I have seen that work effectively, and just enter the fundraising season expecting that the leaders of these organizations, that we are going to be second guessed, that there is going to be a double standard. Do not operate in a space of surprise about that. Assume that that's the case and figure out what your role can be as members of the board in supporting the CEO or ED of the organization on whose board you serve.
Mm-hmm. Appreciate that, Tamara. Indira?
Yeah, I think quickly, we need to stop gatekeeping funding opportunities. I think we need to be mindful of when we put out funding opportunities, if it's a special invite or special access to it. I think we need to be mindful of the application process and what that looks like in real time. Is it too cumbersome for some organizations who have limited capacity? And then even when funders do site visits or ask for additional information, you know, those things can be significant funding obstacles depending on your capacity and depending on the level of information that folks are asking for. And then what I will also say, to go back a little bit to what Kube said in terms of who's at the table, you know, being mindful of, are you able to invite somebody in the room and at the table? And I would even say this for those Black women leaders, those rare Black women leaders who have access to some of these tables, can you bring somebody else in, right? Can you bring in another Black woman leader? If you are an ally and you have access to these rooms, thinking about what Black women are in your lives who could potentially benefit from this. So just a couple of things.
Yeah, my hope is that one of the outcomes, you know, following this panel is that we can have this real conversation. I think there are too few options where funders and Black women nonprofit leaders are in conversation with each other, because we need to work some of these things out. It's not going to be worked out on this panel with us today, but we need to work it out. And so my hope is that we get to be in real conversation, both about the way that you're experiencing the funding community, and I think we also get to share some of the challenges that the funding community is experiencing. I mean, I'll say for our region, you know, relative to other metropolitan regions of our size, we don't have the same capital flows from a philanthropic perspective. I don't believe that that this is not coming from a scarcity positioning. But it's different, which means that we have to look at how we are in relationship with each other differently. So Tamara, I'm down for having this conversation as a follow-up because it's super important. It might not be for the public, but it should be for a group of us to really sit down and work through some of this. Sorry to go off script.
Thank you for that, Tonya.
I appreciate that. And I'm going to take a point of personal privilege, sister leaders, and skip the question that I'm supposed to ask and move on to your question, Indira, about, I'm not going to say it because that means I'll be asking your question. So please go ahead, and because part of what I'm going to ask, I think, will get wrapped up either taken care of in Q&A or one of the last questions that Kube and Tonya are going to ask.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And again, thank you for that, Tonya. Building ecosystems of support is another key theme coming out of the report. How can we foster these ecosystems within and across organizations, and what role can allies play in this process?
So this is comprehensive, which is one of the reasons I appreciate you allowing me to skip mine. I'll just throw in the conversation that I think to one of the questions I believe I saw come up in the chat, that allies are critical. And in fact, this project was born out of a group of both Black women leaders and allies in the region who identified that there was an issue and said, we need to do something about it beyond talking about it in this gathering, and then went to work, set about finding people who would invest in the nascent stages of this project. And here we are, having just released a report. So that conversation, I'm sure, I wasn't present for it, was not comfortable, right? But it felt necessary. So I think keeping the challenges that are outlined in the report and that we're talking about top of mind, and having those conversations also when Black women leaders are not present, and calling peers to task is a critical first step. And then I think putting pressure on each other, meaning allies, to put your money where your mouth is, right? And invest in a real tangible way, so that we can actually create a healthy ecosystem. Because what exists right now is a crisis, and a whole bunch of silos and a whole bunch of Black women and gender expansive folks suffering in silence.
Mhm.
I want to go back to what Tonya had mentioned in her earlier remarks when we first started, because I think it's so critical for building an ecosystem of support. Tonya, I really appreciated what you said in terms of how you keep millennial women in your life personally and professionally. And I think one of the elephants in the room that we are not talking about, particularly as Black women leaders, is how are we building a pipeline for the next generation? To Kube's point as well, who said, nobody wants to take her job. Nobody really wants to take my job. And, I think there is so much value as someone who is surrounded by an intergenerational circle who is standing and surviving because of my intergenerational support. I think that's so, so critical, because when I think about what's happening right now, particularly with the younger Black women leaders, they need the seasoned wisdom and guidance and support and things like that. So I really just want to uplift. The other conversation I would add to what you said not too long ago, Tonya, about the funding piece is we also need to have an intergenerational conversation around how are we building this pipeline? How are we supporting each other, et cetera, et cetera? Because there's still work to do intergenerationally. And the millennial folks still need the folks who have come before us. And I do think there's also something to learn vice versa from the folks who have been there, but to also learn from others. So absolutely. So thank you.
Thanks, Indira. I'll just add very briefly, first, millennial women are so much fun. And I'm always down for fun. And the learning is two-way, right? I just don't think we can afford to lose some of the, the tools, techniques, the boldness that that millennial women, millennial Black women especially, bring to the table, even as we are, sharing some of our, our trials, triumphs, lessons learned, and trying to clear a path, that perhaps is far more smooth and seamless than the one that we have. And I'm saying this, I'm being specific about Gen X and millennials, because I don't know that the relationship has been as smooth as I would have imagined or desired between boomers and Gen X. I think we because they've been continue to be working so very hard, that I think that there's been a gap, a bit of a gap, and we just have to be intentional, as we're looking ahead, that the gap.
Tonya, I really view that as a Gen Xer as part of my responsibility and hopefully legacy as a leader. So I appreciate you lifting that up. And Kube, I am actually going to ask you to close us out with your question. I think we're running a little bit behind, but I don't regret it. I want to move into question and answer after your piece, but I just think it's so important to put that into the space.
Absolutely. And as a millennial myself, echo all the things that are being said. And there's just so much that millennials too are bringing to the table to be able to, and most often just being unapologetic about how we show up in the work, right? And not refusing to suffer when we don't have to, and really leaning in and learning from everybody and from ourselves. So appreciate everybody bringing that to the forefront. And the last question to close us out to the group: how can we promote a culture of self-care and wellness within the nonprofit sector to ensure that Black women leaders are supported and have the resources to maintain their health and resilience?
I think first and foremost, we have to normalize not running this rat race, right? We have to normalize slowing down. We have to normalize practicing the pause. We have to normalize saying, you know what, I'm not well and I need to take some time. We have to normalize talking about our mental health and being able to say what we're needing in terms of whatever is happening. And I think for Black women leaders who wear the mask, it's hard to take off that mask. It's hard to say, I'm struggling. It's hard to say, I feel like I'm on the edge. And so we have to be able to create an environment that is safe where we can be vulnerable because the mask is killing us. And that is one of my deepest fears in terms of Black women just not being able to say, I need help.
As a Gen Xer who was taught something different, one of the pieces of workplace culture that's really important for me to cultivate is self-care, right? Like that is something that is a critical part of how I show up for my team, but who shows up for us? And so in what ways, again, back to the board piece and governance, in what ways are our boards making it easier in Tira to have those conversations? What practices are in place? Is there a sabbatical in place? Is there a reasonable leave policy or PTO policy in place? And is somebody on the board paying attention? Because that phenomenon of us just kind of operating in a space of scarcity and doing and doing and doing and doing, I believe it's the responsibility of us as leaders to take better care of ourselves, but it's also the responsibility of the board to make sure that there are policies and practices in place that support wellness, truly.
Agree with everything that's been said. I'll only offer that I think there's a unique opportunity for us to get better organized. Again, it's hard when you are sort of managing these things in a one-off with your organization alone, as opposed to thinking about the kinds of tools that we can use, share, rally around as a sector. And I think there's real opportunity in that for all of us, for all of our health and wellness and efficacy in the roles that we're holding.
Yeah, and I will just round us off, ditto to everything everybody has said, and just say that there's an opportunity for us as Black women to own our power and actually push back. And personally, for me, this powerful women on the call know that I've said I'm 6 years into my tenure, going on 20. and have been the equivalent of 3 executives for the last 3 years, and I just don't have it in me anymore. And so I had to have a real open and honest conversation with myself of what is it going to take for me to rest? And then having that transparent conversation with my board, which was really, really hard for me to do with myself first. But I was only able to do it because I had a group of Black women around me who said, we got you, sis. If you just need a hug, we got you. If you just need a glass of wine, I got you. So owning your own power to be able to have those real conversations, like, everybody is sort of like, what do I need? And then starting that conversation with your board and creating a community or seeking a community who will support you in your rest journey.
Kubi, I think that provides a wonderful transition to Q&A. And given all of our emphasis on this intergenerational piece, but especially you, Tonya, I'm going to read a question that begins, "This is such an excellent conversation. Thank you for having this. I'm a Black woman nonprofit senior leader, not a CEO yet. I love that. Who is in my mid-30s. What are some small steps I can take now to prepare myself for what I may face in the next decade?"
Wow, that's a powerful question. And I don't believe that the answer is, sign up for a program. I think it is really being in relationship with the women leaders who are in places and spaces that you aspire to. That's kind of the sort of the big picture. Then there's some tactical things. I believe in sharpening skills always. Sometimes we take on roles that we might not love to learn a skill that will prepare you to be a CEO. And this is general and across the board, right? I worked as an operations manager for 9 years. I hate operations. But I had to do it because I'm using every skill, every tool in my toolbox now, running the community foundation. And then it's try. I think sometimes we believe that we always need more experience. Oh, if I could just do this and this and that, then I'll be ready to be a CEO. I believe that most of the time, women leaders, Black women leaders especially, have more experience because you've done more things, whether in your professional life or in your personal life, community life, in terms of leadership, than we give ourselves credit for. And so don't think you have to go and do a whole nother master's degree, to be ready to lead an organization.
That undervaluing piece, I can identify on so many fronts, just not giving ourselves enough credit for the expertise we already bring to bear. So thank you for that. And that question was offered by Christina Jones. I want to move to a question from Michelle Cole, who asked, what do panelists think of the idea that the traditional nonprofit board structure is outdated and anachronistic, given how nonprofits and boards came into being, often as the charitable endeavors of wealthy white women who didn't work outside the home? Now that nonprofits are professionally led and run small social justice businesses, how should the sector be thinking about the role of boards beyond keeping that 501c3 status?
My.
My.
I'm not going to use my infamous word that I use for boards, but what I will say is that we need to reimagine what board governance looks like, what boards look like. Is the purpose of boards, does it still stand today what it stood when they first came to inception? I think this is a critical time, a SOS time, to really do some deep dialogue and reflection, and really pivot, right? Because this moment in time where nonprofits are operating in a new way in this post-pandemic, and boards are showing up in a particular way, I think it begs the conversation on what does a reimagining board governance structure really look like? What does that accountability structure really look like? Because we've seen, particularly in the DMV, some pretty high profile cases of boards sleeping on the job, and the ramifications of that have been catastrophic. And so I do think we should reimagine what that looks like and perhaps think about dismantling it in a way to, create different governance type structure.
And I will just also lift up, in addition to what Indira said, that one of that this particular topic was something that the core group of leaders who started to build this project really honed in on. It's something that we know has to be part of the strategies and conversations, community conversations moving forward. So this is not going to be the last time you hear about that. And I think that, the reimagined governance structure that can be then attuned to where the organization is in their life cycle, right? Because every organization, depending on size and scope, and also the field that you're in, it's never going to be a one size fit all approach. And everybody post-pandemic wanted a Black woman leader, but organizations don't have governance structures that are ready to support a Black woman leader. So there is a deeper level of conversation that's needed to really understand, like, what is a governance structure that is realigned, that understands the systems of oppression, that is aware of the individual power and privilege that shows up when you were a Black woman leader or a board, right? What is the board's power and privilege? And then what is the shared equity that we have to doing the work as human beings? And how do you build that into your governance structure? And so really being able to articulate that as a community, as a region, and have tactical ways in which organizations can start to implement that feels and fits them.
So clearly this conversation could have been like 2 hours long. And so what I recommend is that this group reconvenes within the next year as the project continues on its great trajectory. And I vote for in person. We'll figure out the logistics later, but I would love to be in community with the folks who have joined us and who have made some great comments in the chat. And y'all, I did not talk about this with any of our fabulous panelists, but it feels to me, in order to honor the fact that this is an ongoing conversation, that we need to make sure people know, even though we weren't able to get to your questions about maternity leave, for example, or about salary transparency, meaning our leaders talking to each other openly about their salaries, that we hear you, and we do want to create some kind of space, whether virtual or in person, to keep it going and to update you on what tangible things have happened as a result of this report. So more to come. I am incredibly grateful to Indira, Kube, and Tonya for being here. On behalf of the Women's Foundation, the folks who showed up to listen and engage, thank you so much. We do have a couple of asks of you. One is to be an advocate, which many of you already are, but as it relates to this report, please share it, y'all. And particularly the pieces that resonated with you today, share it with your networks, both personal and professional. I have a tendency to compartmentalize. I'm working on that. You can send it to your aunties. You can send it to past colleagues. Share it broadly. Your efforts are going to help us garner the essential partnership and resources required to invest boldly in Black women's leadership. And then we have folks who have the capacity to become an early investor. If you're a funder, we invite you to join us in this collective effort by making an early investment in Black women and Black gender-expansive leaders today. Your financial contributions, in some cases, have already been helpful and will be pivotal to advancing the priorities of our initiative, and are going to be used to directly break down the systemic barriers we've been talking about today. So, as I said, more to come, and please join me in thanking my fellow sister leaders for all that they do, and as I said earlier, how they show up in such meaningful and important ways. Thanks for your time today, everybody, and for being part of this critical conversation. And we look forward to convening again.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you all so much.